Hello and welcome to Your Favourite Teacher. So today I'm going to talk through the plot of Frankenstein. Now this needs to be your first port of call when you're doing any sort of revision, because if you don't know what's happening in the story and you don't know the sequence of events, then it's going to be really hard for you to be able to analyse different ideas or discuss different themes and key characters. So let's start then at the very beginning, where we meet Robert Walton, and he's an explorer, which we already know has some contextual links, and he talks about how he met this man called Victor Frankenstein in the middle of the Arctic. And this is after seeing a gigantic figure crossing the ice. So he's writing this in a letter to his sister, and this really is also another key feature, the fact that we have these letters. They help really structure the story in a slightly different way. So Victor Frankenstein talks about his childhood, and he says that he had the most perfect childhood in Switzerland with a loving family, and they even adopted some orphans, including this beautiful lady Elizabeth, who has become Victor's closest friend. Victor also has a caring and wonderful best friend called Henry Clerval. Just before Victor turns 17 and goes to study at university, his mother dies of scarlet fever. Okay, so he's going to the university at Ingolstadt, and this is one of the key settings. So at Ingolstadt, Victor really becomes obsessed with science. He starts using dead bodies to experiment, and he's trying to learn about the ways in which you can push science and all these different things to do with natural philosophy, and he's sort of trying to figure out the secrets of life, really. And he does this with so much passion that he kind of loses touch with his family, and he misses out on what's important. So he rises to the top of his field and suddenly one night discovers the secret of life. And he has visions of creating a new and noble race. So he puts all of his knowledge to work on an experiment and creates a monster made of body parts. Now, this monster is obviously our creature, Frankenstein's monster. So once he animates his creature, he kind of takes a step back and looks at it and is so horrified by what he's created. It's so abnormal, it's so abhorrent that he just abandons it. And he kind of has this sort of wishful thinking that this monster, after being created, is just going to leave him alone. Now, we kind of know that that's not going to be the case. He's not going to get away with things as easily as that. Otherwise, it would be a very short story. So Victor hopes that the monster's disappeared forever, but some months later, he receives word that his youngest brother, William, has been murdered. Now, William being murdered is our first real telling sign of the danger behind this monster. So Victor sees the monster lingering at the site of the murder and is sure that the monster has committed the murder. But rather than say this, he keeps it secret because he doesn't want it to fall back on him. And instead, Justine, who's another adoptee in his family, becomes accused of the crime, and she's eventually convicted and then executed. So we have this horrible sort of two people that have died now because of Frankenstein's creation. Frankenstein really is in these mountains hiking away to try and escape the tragedy and hoping to alleviate his suffering with the beauty of nature, which we can see is very significant for this period of Romanticism and Romantic writing. So he's hiking away, and one day the monster appears, and despite Victor's curses, begs him to listen to his story. And the monster describes his awful life and the suffering and rejection that he's faced based on, the way that he looks and the fact that he's been completely abandoned. The monster talks about how he's learnt to read and speak, and the monster blames his rage on humanity and his inability for people to perceive his inner goodness, and how he's become completely isolated. So he's very angry at Victor, the monster's very angry at Victor because he's suffering and he never really asked to be created, and Victor's created this monster and then just left him to it, to his isolation. And so the monster asks Victor to accept his responsibility and to show some sympathy for what the monster's feeling. And he pleads with Victor to build him a female companion. And Victor's guilt and maybe a sense of him just wanting it to be over and wants to be left alone and just rid his hands of this creature, he agrees to build him what will be the bride of Frankenstein. Back in Geneva, Victor's father expresses his wish that Victor marry Elizabeth, and Victor says he must first travel to England. On the way, Victor meets up with Clerval. Soon though, Victor then leaves Clerval in a house in Scotland and starts to create his second monster. But one night, Victor begins to worry that this female monster might be as destructive as the first. And he already knows the danger of creating a monster like this because he's lost his younger brother and he's seen then Justine be killed as a circumstance. So whilst Victor's contemplating how scary this is and realising the consequences of what he's doing, Victor sees the first monster watching him at work through the window, and the horrifying sight pushes Victor to destroy the female monster. The original monster vows revenge, saying that it will be with him on his wedding night. Victor takes the remains of the female monster and dumps them in the ocean. But when he returns to the shore, he's accused of a murder that was committed the same night. Victor finds out who the murder victim is. It's Clerval, his closest friend, who Frankenstein has killed in anger because of the abandonment of the female bride. So when he realises that Clerval is the victim of the murder, he collapses and he goes into this delusional state for a few months. And when he wakes, his father has arrived and he's been cleared of all the criminal charges against him. Victor returns with his father to Geneva and there he marries Elizabeth. But on his wedding night, the monster kills Elizabeth. And Victor's father then dies of grief. So basically, Victor has no one left. His reckless search for scientific advancements has meant that everyone that he once loved is gone because he's created this monster and this monster has been abandoned and so has sought revenge. So Victor realises that, it is war, and that he vows to hunt down the creature and that he wants to dedicate the rest of his life to doing that. So Victor tracks the monster down to the Arctic, but becomes trapped on some breaking ice and is rescued by the crew. It takes us right back to the start of the novel. So Walton writes another series of letters to his sister, and he talks about his failure to reach the North Pole and to restore Victor, who died soon after his rescue. And in Walter's final lesson, he describes his discovery of the monster grieving over Victor's corpse. He accuses the monster of having no remorse, but the monster says that he has suffered more than anyone. With Victor dead, the monster has its revenge and plans to end his own life. Okay, so that's just a quick look at the plot. And obviously you need to have much more detailed understanding of that, but that should hopefully just start you on the right track for your Frankenstein revision. I'm Miss Meeks, thanks for listening.